So we're at the Hilbert Museum right now, and we actually have the director, Mary Platt. And so you've been here since the opening, 2000, did it open 2016?
Yes, yeah. Well, I was here, I came in 2017, but
I
I
see.
was, previous to that, I was the Public Relations and Communications Director for Chapman University. So this is actually my 20th year here at Chapman.
Oh, wow. And now, but you got an art history degree at Michigan State?
True, yes.
A BA and an MA there?
True,
Yes.
true. And I moved out to California in 1991 to work at the Segerstrom Center for the Arts.
Yes.
Then went to the Getty, and
Yeah.
then
What
Chapman.
did you do at Getty?
I did public relations and marketing. I was kind of the Renaissance medieval specialist there.
Oh, really?
in that office.
Oh, wow. So you
So-
became very conversed in that field.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So which is interesting because you've gone from Renaissance to, we're going to
To-
talk about Disney. In fact, wait, we'll show you a book if you want right now. So she's written a book on Disney's work, which is on animation, which is what that's in the Hilbert Museum. One of the largest collections of this type of original art is here, and you've specialized in it. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about this book.
Well, and it kind of does tie in because, Disney, he really, across the years that the Disney studios have been operating, they've really taken in and been inspired by many areas of art, including medieval and Renaissance art.
Yeah, it makes sense. You think of
with the fairy tales.
Yeah, and
and
Fantasia and some of these other ones, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Sleeping Beauty
All
is, so what this book is this is actually the first volume of a 2-volume set that we're doing on Mark and Jan Hilbert's collection of Disney art. So it's called Masterpieces of Disney Art from the Hilbert Collection.
Right, and early, so this is
And-
29 to 67 in this
Yeah,
one.
it goes up to 67, so it goes up to the last movie that Walt himself worked on, which was Jungle Book.
Okay,
But this includes all kinds of, these are all pieces that the Hilberts have collected over the years. They're all original works by the great Disney artists like Ivan Earle, Mary Blair.
right, which you
and
have
the
both
others.
in here on
Yes.
exhibit. And Mary Blair, you have 2 rooms just of her work, right?
Exactly, yeah. So in fact, including this show actually, this exhibition focuses on Alice in Wonderland, but also includes her earlier works and even some later things that she did. So we're standing in the
Yes.
middle of the Mary Blair exhibition,
Yes,
and
and so, they have enough artwork that they could actually, looking at this, that you could probably take and fill the whole museum, right, with it.
oh, for sure, yeah.
So, but you as the director, curator, decided what to pare down to, and you decided Mary Blair.
Yes, Mary Blair.
Okay, I was going to
because-
say why, yeah, yeah.
Well, she is, of all the artists who worked at Disney, if you asked a real Disney fan to name their favorites, she is almost always at the very top of the list. She was one of the great colorists and color designers in Disney history. And in fact, Walt said, he didn't like the color purple except when Mary Blair used it.
Right, and I noticed there was a quote on the wall, like, he'd never seen a color like that other than Mary Blair.
Yeah, and so that really started, she actually had a couple of different encounters with Disney over her lifetime. And this gallery that we're in right now talks about her early years at Disney. And
Is that in 1951, or is that even before that?
it's even before that, yeah. She actually started prior to Dumbo, which came out
really
in 1940.
Yeah,
So Dumbo was really one of the first things that she worked on.
I see.
And she was one of she got sent out with the other artists to do on-site research at the various circuses that came through Los Angeles at the time. And so we have a very early piece by her that was painted at a circus. And it's an incredible piece. She wanted really to be a serious watercolorist. And she and her husband, Lee Blair, both came out of, they were both in the watercolor societies of the time, and they really wanted to make a go of it as serious
yeah,
artists.
as a fine artist.
But then the Depression hit,
Yeah,
and then artists couldn't sell their work.
right.
And so that was when we had this, big immigration of artists that came to Los Angeles to work in the movie industry.
Yes, and where was she from originally, Mary Blair?
Well, she actually was originally from Oklahoma, but her family had moved to California early in her childhood. And so, she didn't have to come from far
Right.
to work for Disney.
And she was born, what, like 1911 or something?
Yeah, she was born in 1911. Her lifespan, 1911 to 1978.
Yeah, so she didn't
And-
live that old, really.
No, unfortunately, she died young at 66.
Yeah, that's really young, I can tell. And so, but it must have been difficult too for her to come out. Oh, so she comes from Oklahoma, comes to California, and she starts her career in the 30s, right?
Yep.
When she's about 20. As a woman artist, especially,
Right.
Was there hurdles that she had to overcome for like Disney?
Oh, absolutely.
I would think. What were those? What would those have
so
been?
strangely enough, a lot of people think that it was a hard go for women and people of color at Disney, and in many ways it was in those early years because women and people of color didn't really have the opportunities and for education and
just
networking.
to become an artist too.
But Disney was actually hiring a lot of women. His ink and paint department, there was a whole building called Ink and Paint, and that was almost all women.
And why was that, do you think?
He believed that women were more detail oriented, and it's interesting. There's a beautiful book called Ink and Paint by Mindy Johnson, and it talks about how these women, they would dress up to the nines every day, and they all wore little white gloves with the fingers cut off, so they could manipulate the paint brushes. And what they were doing was the essential but grunt work that went in. It's the male animators would design the characters and draw the characters, and then every animation sequence has hundreds of separate paintings in it.
Right.
And so for even a sequence where it was showing a character walking across a room, there might be 50 to 100
Right.
different paintings in it, all of the same character, but with various movements. And so these women would do all those in between
Yeah.
paintings.
The meticulous stuff.
And they had full length windows at their. It was not a bad deal. But they weren't allowed to rise. They weren't allowed to become
creative part.
animators.
Right. But Blair was.
But Blair, she came to Disney in the early 40s and worked on Dumbo and then left. Again, her husband Lee was also working at Disney and he remained. And in 1941, Walt Disney was invited by President Roosevelt to go on a good neighbor tour to South America and Mexico. At the time, of course, Europe was at war. America wasn't in the war yet. And America was trying to extend its influence over our hemisphere and the Americas, really to ward off the Nazis, from getting any influence there. But they couched this as a good neighbor tour, and Walt Disney was one of the most famous people in the world by that time.
And that's
in
because of
1941.
Snow White and things like that.
Yeah, he'd won Oscars, and so.
And this was 41?
41.
Right
So,
before Pearl Harbor, I guess, they do this.
yes.
Yes.
And so for several months, so Disney said he would go, but he said, the deal is I want to take a bunch of my artists with me.
It's a business.
And so, and it was really one of the early airplane tours,
Yes.
that went internationally and private airplane that they hired and took these artists with him. And so Lee Blair was one of the artists that Disney chose. And Lee said, well, I want to bring my wife Mary with me.
So Lee was also an artist.
And, they vaguely remembered Mary, so they said, okay, she can come.
Right.
And so it was more than that, but it eventually, she ended up on the trip.
Right.
And we
Was
have
Disney on that trip too?
Disney and his wife Lillian
Okay,
went.
so that's a big deal.
There's a wonderful documentary on it called Walt and El Grupo. They called it El Grupo. That went to South America.
On this
And it's on-
this walkabout to try to promote America, really, right?
Yeah, and American creativity.
And what's more American than Walt Disney and Snow White and
Exactly.
all whatever those other things that he would have done, Dumbo.
Yeah, you know, he was like the greatest ambassador that they could think of.
And was Disney World open, Disneyland open at that time yet?
No.
That wasn't open
No,
yet,
that
right?
didn't come
That's
around.
like into the 60s?
In 1955.
55, okay.
Yeah. So, and you know, this was the great age when, you know, Hollywood was also turning to South America with all the raft of South American movies they did with like Carmen Miranda and all the big stars. So, you know, it was a big, it was in the zeitgeist. And, and so Mary goes on this trip. And her world is completely changed by this.
In what way?
We can see the palette. So her early darker palette, she's all of a sudden, she's surrounded. Any of us who've gone to Mexico or South America know that you're surrounded by all these bright colors, the
different
sunshine.
Light too, yeah.
The light is different, the music, the rhythms. And she's taking this all in like a sponge. And so she's doing these magnificent sketching watercolors along the way. And we have some of the watercolors here in the gallery.
Yeah, she's only 30 at that point.
Yeah, she's a young woman, and so she's taking all this in, and her palette just, and more important, Walt starts to look at her work and think, wow, what is this woman doing? You know, she's really amazing.
Right.
And she's doing something different. You know, she flattens out the characters. It's very modernistic what she's doing. She's got a lot of influence. Mark and I have talked about this a lot. She's got influence from Escher and Picasso, and she's really ahead of her time. And Disney, of course, was ahead of his time.
And she was academically trained as well?
Well, she trained, they went to the art academies, and so, you know, she was definitely a trained artist for sure.
And she's the only one on this group of people that are going around Mexico, Central America, South America, the only female artist in that bunch?
The only
and
female.
That's because she's Lee's wife.
Exactly.
And they're there for, how long does this go on, this trip?
So this goes on, I think it was probably 6 weeks. I mean,
so long enough
for
him being Disney and the other men that probably have gravitas to see her work, to interact with her, and something clicks.
Something clicks.
Yes.
And so Disney hires her back after the tour to do he did 2 what they call package features, which were movies made up of little short movies. 2 of them based on the South America trip were The Three Caballeros and Saludos Amigos, kind of starring, Donald Duck was the big star of the moment, and but other little characters too. And so Mary works on those 2 films and really gets to, I mean, there's a couple sequences where you can certainly see her style coming through completely.
And she's creating.
There's the little train of Kaipura where there's, you know, it's very modernistic looking. And then there's a section on the posada, the children's posada in Mexico for Christmas time, where they all go on a procession through the town with their lanterns. And you can see the little children that she's creating, which are sort of forerunners of what she would do later for It's a Small World.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So you'd say Disneyland opens 1955.
Yeah.
It's a Small World is one of their premier exhibits, right, for the beginnings.
Well, there's a history there.
Okay, let's
there's
talk about
a history
that.
there.
Yeah.
So, you know, prior to that, she is actually named the color lead and the design lead for 3 major Disney full-length pictures, which are Cinderella, Alice in Wonderland, and Peter Pan.
And Alice in Wonderland's 51.
51.
And when is Peter Pan?
53.
And
then she leaves. Disney again. Her Lee moved out to the East Coast to start a company where he was doing design work for television sets, and he becomes very rich doing that. And so she of course goes out. They have kids by that time, and so she becomes a designer also on the East Coast. Starts working. She worked for Little Golden Books. All of her little golden books, I think, are still in print. I Can Fly, And they're all the whimsical little children, that you saw beginning with, the sequence in the South American films.
Right.
And then, she also, designed fashions, wallpaper, magazine ads. And Mark has several of those designs as well. They're not in this show, but we'll have them rotating in at a certain point. And then Walt calls her back in 1963. So he has been tapped to do 3 and then 4 pavilions at the 1964 World's Fair in Queens, New York, right?
And she's on the East Coast.
So she's on the East Coast.
And Lee's become big, and she's become big, or bigger, it sounds like.
Exactly. So Walt called on Mary to help design the pavilion for Pepsi, which was also, it was a partnership with UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund. And the concept was children of the world coming together and singing a song together. Well, we all know what that became.
Yes, and that was what year?
63 was when she was called on, and then 64 was when the World's Fair opened.
Yes.
And
so what did it become?
It became It's a Small World.
Right.
She did not write the song. That was by the Sherman Brothers.
Yeah. Why is that
the
song?
most loved, hated song in the world.
Exactly.
It just sticks in your head.
It does. It's so amazing.
We won't sing it right now.
Yeah, no, I can't even think about it or it'll go.
But she worked with Raleigh Crump and other Disney designers, but she was really the lead on the design of all the children, and also the facade of the ride, which was a little different. It became one of the most, if not the most popular pavilion at the World's Fair. So when the fair shut down, Disney took several of his pavilion ideas from that fair and recreated them at Disneyland, his new park that opened in 55.
And this is 64?
Yeah. So the park's still building and still kind of finding its
way.
feet. And so It's a Small World opened at Disneyland with its now famous, facade with the smiling clock and everything, which, she designed. And now it's been replicated at almost, I think, every Disney park around the world.
And so when he decides, Disney goes, yeah, we need to do this. This is interesting.
Yeah.
He rehires her?
He rehires her.
Yeah. One more
they
time.
They remained
a third
friends,
time.
All through the times that she left and came back and left and came back.
Yes.
He maintained his friendship and respect for her, and really, wanted her to come back.
Right.
And so that was really the last thing that she did before Disney passed away in '66.
Yes.
But she went on to do 2 more projects for the Disney parks, which were, she did 2 murals for Tomorrowland here at Disneyland. And then she also did and those are covered up now, by the way, because when they did Captain EO, they plastered over them. They're still apparently safe underneath there, but a lot of Mary Blair fans have been lobbying to get them to uncover them, but they haven't done it yet. So they're the sort of hidden murals of Mary Blair. And but the other one was the huge child mural that she did for the Contemporary Resort at Disney World in 1971. So it's her view of the Grand Canyon. So it's got all the children of the Grand Canyon, and they've got their donkeys and their, so it's little cowboy kids and Native American kids and, all up on the sides of the Grand Canyon. And actually the monorail goes right through the middle. That's the A-framed Contemporary Resort. And the monorail goes right through the middle of it. So when people ride the monorail, they still see this gigantic child mural that Mary Blair did.
And that was in
71.
Mm-hmm.
And then she passed away in 78.
She's young, relatively speaking.
Yeah, she had an aneurysm, I think. And but her work still continues to be championed by the fans. The fans were really the ones, I think, that brought it back, in a big way.
Right.
And now Disney, of course, they take note of that. And so when you go to, in fact, I was just at Disneyland a couple weeks ago, and in the hotels, they have a lot of Mary Blair souvenirs. You can get posters and aprons, and
They do
in the gift shops.
Do they own, you probably don't know, but is something like that owned by Disney, or is it in cooperation with her family?
It's probably, I would like to hope it's in cooperation with her family. I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
I think probably Disney owns whatever design she did for them.
Yes. And when did she really become that person, right? Recognized today, like
I think in the 90s was really. I mean, she was actually named Disney Legend, which is their top honor. It's like their Oscar.
Was that after her death?
Yeah, posthumously in 1991. And but leading up to that, I think the renaissance of Mary Blair had begun because the fans were on top of it, and she's become. There are a couple of traditions within Disney. There's the Dapper Days tradition where people dress up very dapperly, like from the 1950s or 40s.
Have you done that?
I have not, but I'm tending to think I should.
Yeah, I mean, you're a Disney expert to some extent, right?
Probably should.
That's probably a fair statement, right?
Yeah. And then there's also Disney bounding, which is that you can't dress up as the character. That's like forbidden in the parks because you don't want to compete with the actual characters.
Right.
But you can dress evoking the character. And so, a lot of people, like there's now they sell Mary Blair dresses where it's like her designs from Alice in Wonderland on it. And you can dapperly dress up in that, and have your headband on and not be the character Alice, but evoke Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah, evoke Mary Blair.
And Mary Blair, yeah.
Has there been any books or movies or anything done on this lady?
Yes, you can. There's quite a few videos that have been done. You can go on YouTube and find videos on her. I think the big expert on her life is John Canemaker, who's he's an animation, I think he's a former artist and expert.
Right.
So he wrote kind of the book on Mary Blair. And also Mindy Johnson has done a book called Queens of Animation, which talks not only about Mary Blair, but the ink and paint women and the other women at Disney that are not as famous as Mary Blair, but also along the way, worked from the 1930s and 40s on.
Yes, because this seems like it would be an unsung group of women, kind of led by Mary Blair, that did this. Is that a true statement?
I think it's a true statement. Yeah. And I think with her fame now, what we want to do is uncover the rest of these women, that worked for Disney.
Right. I figured
and kind
there
of,
has to be others.
they put up with a lot.
Yeah, that's right.
Because you're in the boys' club.
Right. That's right.
And she found that to a certain extent. I think when she was working on pictures like Cinderella and Peter Pan, there was a pushback from the male animators that, Walt, we think we should go back to our tried and true style, which is the slightly rounded animated figures.
Right.
And so when you look at her flat figures, they're very artistic and everything.
And colorful.
And colorful, but they never really got picked up, except in those early, like the South American pictures. And then you can look at, some of her vision went into, of course, the colors that were used in the films and also the backgrounds. You can see a lot of her whimsical, imaginative style. And when you look at some of these pictures, as we're going through them on this video,
right?
You'll kind of pick up on what her style was. And
yes, having gone through the exhibit, I can sense some of that as well.
Yeah, it's modernistic, but it's also childlike in a way, in a good way.
Yes.
It's like when Picasso said it took his whole life to learn how to paint like a child.
Right.
Well, I think she innately had that, and was able to evoke that sense of wonder and creativity and just boundless imagination that children have.
And what do you think her legacy is?
Well, I think it's just that. I think it's, first of all, I think she's not just one of the great Disney artists, she's one of our great California artists, and also, just a great artist.
And she did other things too, right? There's a painting in here, I think,
Yeah.
of her and her husband looking over a bluff, right?
Yeah, it's
Yes.
Lee's painting of her.
Yes. Oh, that was Lee who painted her.
Yes.
Okay. He was a good painter too.
He was a great painter,
Yeah.
sure. But we have at least one, the one watercolor she did for Dumbo, and then the others that she did for the South America tour. And I know Mark's always looking for more.
Yeah.
So if
if you're out there,
if you have a nice Mary Blair, call us. I'm still doing this.
yeah. And so, how's the response been just from the general public that's coming in to see this? Are there a lot of people coming in going, "Where's the Mary Blair?"
Yes.
And they don't none of the rest are like Mary Blair, right?
Sometimes we can see them coming because they'll come
They're
in with their
dressed up?
mouse ears on and their Mary Blair dresses.
Oh,
and
very interesting.
Their Dapper Dan outfits, you
Yes.
know. And then sometimes it's just, we'll get calls from all over the country, like people saying, "Is your Mary Blair exhibition still on? Because I'm going to be in California in July, and
interesting.
I'd like to come see it." So
I think that's wonderful.
so the Disney sort of grapevine gets it out there that,
Yes.
this is, and the thing is, we are literally 15 minutes from Disneyland. So,
Yeah, I know.
So people coming to Disneyland, or the people that come to the D23 Disney conference in this summer, should know that the Hilbert Museum, like hop in an Uber and say Hilbert Museum, and you'll be here in
Right.
like under 15 minutes.
And there's always going to be an exhibit of animation art that will be up.
Yes, so the Mary Blair exhibition will be up until the end of August this year.
And when that comes down, though, you'll put up other animation art, right?
Yes, so our next one will be Disney classics from the 50s and 60s.
Oh, okay.
So we'll troll through Mark's collection and pick some of
Yeah.
the great ones from that.
And it's all original art or cells?
All original, yeah. Yeah, these are all by Disney artists,
Yeah.
and they are all from the period. And, in fact, when you look at Mary Blair, what she was a concept artist. So she painted concept paintings, which are little square, sometimes panoramic, paintings on board, done in gouache.
Right.
And those were made for, like, she would talk directly with Walt or directly with the directors of the movies and get their vision.
Right, and then she brings the
paints
concept.
it.
Yeah, she's a concept artist.
Yeah, so she gets it out there, and then they pin those up to the boards in the animation artists' rooms. And so a lot of collectors like to display them showing the pinholes.
I saw some of those in there. There's
Yeah.
one of Alice in Wonderland in there.
Yeah.
That has,
the pinholes
you can see
in
the
each.
pinholes on all sides. So it was up, inspiration, concept.
Yep,
And,
looked at by the Disney artists, used in the production.
yes.
And so collectors want you to know that. So like almost all of these have the pinholes visible.
Have you had people come in that knew Mary Blair?
When we opened, we actually had a smaller Mary Blair exhibition in the original Hilbert Museum in, I think, 2017 or 2018. And her nieces, one of her nieces came, I think, to the show. And so, that was really nice to meet her. And
Yeah, I think it would be great if you could capture those voices as well.
yeah, and we're
know.
hoping to invite, she's got, I think, 2 living nieces now that, we would like to invite here and maybe get them on tape.
Yeah, because I would love to know what, maybe her nieces might have a sense what she would think about her refound fame. Because I'm sure, even though at the end of her life she was very, she knows Walt Disney, okay, so he's a very important person. But it doesn't sound, and I haven't done any research, but it doesn't sound like she reached that pinnacle of fine art, which people during her lifetime that were, going, oh my gosh, this is a Mary Blair original.
Yeah.
She was known for her concepts. She was known for other things. Designs.
Illustrations.
But she never got the true look at what I was able to do in her life, it sounds like.
And I think that was probably, for both her and a lesser extent for Lee, because
Yes.
Lee continued kind of doing his fine art work as well.
Right.
And she did to a certain extent, but I think, her life became, consumed by the design work and the Disney work.
Yeah.
And then, of course, on top of that, being a woman
Yeah,
and
she had
having
kids, right? Yeah.
you know, in a household, you know,
Yeah.
so you've got, you know, she said, we've got one of these quotes up here, I had 3 jobs,
Yeah.
raising children, keeping house, and doing my artwork.
Yeah.
Yeah, which, you know, there was that.
Yeah,
So,
some of that still exists today.
It
I mean,
does.
a lot of women artists still have to
do
juggle
all
all
that.
They do, and
Yeah.
then try to break out of that so they get recognition as well.
Yeah, and one of the things we do here at the Hilbert is I want to champion, especially, you know, the women artists of California, and of course Mary Blair's really in the vanguard of those.
Yeah.
But we have so many others because California was kind of a hotbed for women artists.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the 20th century. A lot of, in the early 20th century, women were oftentimes excluded on the East Coast from being in the art clubs.
Yeah.
So they were all male, and
Mm-hmm.
and of course those were such important venues for networking and selling your works.
Right.
But out here in California, it was a lot freer, and not only were they members, but they were oftentimes originators, like creators of the art clubs
Mm-hmm.
and leaders. And so, you know, we're proud to have so many women artists in the Hilbert collection.
Yes. Yeah. Having gone through it, you see a lot.
Yeah. We have an all women artist show coming up later
Nice.
this year.
Oh, very good.
So
Do you have a Edith Hamlin in it?
probably.
Yeah, I probably do. Maybe you could point out a few pieces of Mary's work that you think are really interesting that we should include in this, you know, interview. By the way, if people are just listening to it, they should also go and watch us on YouTube because you'll be able to see us
see
live,
those.
and then we'll show you some of the things. Like this clearly is one of the pieces that was done for
It's a small world.
Small World, right?
Yeah, all 3 of these pieces were original designs by Mary Blair, original paintings by her. So this is her, she's working toward what she wants the facade to look like. And of course we know what the facade looks like now. It's very, it's like white and gold, basically. But you know, in the early concept pieces for this, it was very colorful. You know, because she's really, again, thinking like a child. What would a child do? Use a lot of colors,
Right.
probably. And then it became more sophisticated and almost more like a paper cutout sculpture as it went along. And then you've got the little children here. So these are just, you know, concepts for the Inuit kid and also, you know, just various kids flying. This is probably for the what I call the apotheosis scene at the end of Small World, where the children all come together in
Right.
the white and gold world,
Right.
and they're all together singing that song.
Yeah.
I love this piece here. So this was from another package feature by Disney that was done post-war.
Yeah, the
It
Headless
was called
Horseman of
Ichabod
County.
and Mr. Toad. So it was like the Wind in the Willows plus Sleepy Hollow
Yes.
in one feature. And so this is a very dramatic
Yeah, 1949.
image of the Headless Horseman chasing poor Ichabod.
Yeah, I don't know if you could get away with that today, having cartoons where they're cutting off people's heads. and
Really?
things.
Yeah, you know, you wonder. Oh my gosh, the cartoons we grew up with were all violence,
Yeah,
right?
they were.
At Coyote.
Right.
And then, let's see, we talked about this one.
Yeah, that's the Dumbo one.
The dark circus one.
Right. And that was, she actually went and painted that at a circus in 1935.
So Disney was well known for sending his artists out to do research on site. You know,
Right.
when they were doing Bambi, they would go to the zoo or they'd actually bring animals into the studio.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, he sent artists out to the circuses to like just get all the feel and flavor of the circus.
Right.
And so they would paint these images. And this, I think, is really interesting because it's not, you know, you would think a circus is all about fun and light and happiness.
No.
But, you know, not Dumbo and
Yeah.
not this image. This is about being an outsider. You're outside the tent. You're looking in kind of wistfully.
Right.
You're behind the big banners.
Yeah.
And it evokes the feeling of, you know, Dumbo being a little outsider, that he wasn't accepted.
Yes.
And he always felt like he was looking in, you know, at the other animals having fun. So it really does capture, I think.
Yeah, and it's an interesting perspective. It's the perspective of the workers,
Yep.
not the crowd, right?
Right.
They're all lit up and colorful and
Yeah.
headed in for a fun time. The back of the of the big murals are all dark, and
Yep.
you just have to kind of guess what's on them.
Exactly. Moody.
Oh, that's a very interesting painting.
But then look at how her colors light up.
And
when
this
she's-
is on that trip, right?
This is on the trip to South America.
1941.
Yeah, so we're not sure exactly. This might be Peru, I think, with these hats.
Looks like
and
it.
We're not sure exactly where that is, but you can see how her palette gets lighter and
Mm-hmm.
brighter, and she's really catching like all the nuances of the costumes,
Mm-hmm.
but not in like super duper detail. These are, she makes it into an almost modernist
Yeah.
painting.
And you feel that she's doing it as she's experiencing it
Mm-hmm.
as well. I like the vultures on the top of the roof.
Yep.
And so what other pieces should we look at?
So,
Maybe Alice in Wonderland
yeah,
or
let's
any
look
of
at
those?
some of the Alice in Wonderlands.
Yeah.
So I think this and probably It's a Small World were really where her whimsy comes to the fore.
Yeah.
So, she worked out the famous Tea Party scene in several different images. So in this one, she's got kind of a curved table and Alice sitting like in a big sort of trefoil throne.
Right, and you can
And-
see the pinholes,
Yep.
multiple pinholes. They've been changed more, and you can see it was used.
Yeah.
And so she's literally talking to the illustrators, and then she's coming up with the concepts, which really, in this case, are very close to how it ended up being, really, right?
Yeah. And she works it out. Like there's another concept where they're sitting at a round table.
Yes.
And then there's one where they're sitting at a long table and she's in a very exaggerated throne-like chair. So she's working, you can see the imagination working.
Yeah, especially the teapot one.
Yeah,
I mean, that one really is. You look at something like that, so you have these three, tea and tea kettle and two cups, and it's just, it's like surrealistic.
It's surrealistic. I don't think this actually ended up in the movie, but it certainly is a study in, some people think maybe she had the original concept for the spinning teacups at Disneyland.
Sure, one would
could
have
be.
to think that, especially when you see the movement
And
that
they're
she's
kind of writing
done.
in them.
Yeah.
So you wonder
Yeah.
if somebody looked at that and years later went, oh,
Well,
why don't we do a spinning teacup ride?
Well, I think you'd almost have to assume that there was some inspiration, whether it was hers. Somebody looked at that.
Yes.
And came up with an idea.
I would think,
Yeah, that's how that happens.
I think, yeah. And then we've got, of course, the wonderful caterpillar sitting
Yeah.
on his mushroom, smoking
Right.
his hookah.
Yeah, that's very pertinent as of today's world.
Well, and it's funny because when Alice in Wonderland was first released in 1951, it was not a big hit. In fact, it was kind of a disappointment. Box
And why
office
was
wise.
that, do you know?
I think it was, again, ahead of its time.
Too wild,
It was
too
fantastic.
Fantastic.
I don't know. It didn't hit.
Mm-hmm.
But when it was re-released after the psychedelic 60s,
Yes.
then it became a
Pop.
big hit.
Yeah, that's where the
And-
hookah stuff did well, too.
And now it's become,
well,
very
you have the Cheshire
popular.
Cat that's in here,
Oh,
right?
yeah. So this room is mostly artists that are not Mary Blair.
Yes, and maybe we could talk a little bit about some of these artists
Yeah.
that are in here.
So this is, kind of showing her influence, but these are not by her.
Yes.
So this is a cell. I think it's a presentation cell
And can you
because,
explain what that is, a cell and a presentation cell?
yeah, so a cell, CEL, is it's named after celluloid, which is the clear plastic. So what the Disney artists, those wonderful women in ink and paint usually would do would be to paint the character on the back of the clear plastic sheet.
Yeah,
so
like
they're
a
actually
reverse.
painting backwards.
Yeah, it's a reverse mirror type
like
thing, glass. Yes,
Ginger Rogers dancing backwards.
right.
And so they would paint the character on the clear plastic sheet, and then it would be laid on top of a background, so painted background, and then photographed in a big photography room. And so the ladies would create hundreds of these per day, and they'd draw. Once they were dry, they'd stack them in order, take them to the photography room, and then lay the background down. And like if here's the Cheshire Cat. So if it's just showing him laying there, but his grin kind of spreading, that might be 30
Cells.
cells, you know.
And that's the women with the little gloves that are
Yep.
doing, what were they called again?
Ink and paint.
Yeah, ink and
painters.
paint. Yeah.
And so, you know, they'd paint every one of those in-betweens. And so the background would stay the same, but the photographer would take one after the other of the cells and put it on and photograph. And that's what creates the illusion of life, or the illusion of movement.
Yeah. And how does something like that get on the market? And yeah, how does it get on the market for sale?
Many ways. You know, in the early days of animation, they would take these painted cells at the end of the day and dip them in a solution and wash them and reuse the cell, the celluloid. Hence that in Roger Rabbit, you know, where they have the villain that's dipping the little animated figures into the vat.
Yeah, that's it.
That's recalling those days. There were tales that they even, you know, to prevent people taking their characters or copying their characters, that they would take loads of these out and bury them in the desert. I mean, I don't know if that's true or not, but I've been told that by some older Disney people.
Yeah, one of the things I would think too is that they could pretty easily be knocked off, I would think.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you authenticate them as being the original cell?
Yeah, and so in these early days, some of the animators and artists would basically just take their work home with them at the end of the day. It wasn't being, you know, there wasn't anybody really overseeing that much.
Nobody cared, really.
Nobody cared, and so some of the families, you know, still have them.
Yeah.
The other thing that happened that really turned things around was when Disneyland opened, and somebody had the idea, hey, we could make money off
these
old cells.
Right.
And so, you know, they had a bunch of old cells, and so they put together a department which was overseen by a woman, where the, you know, the cells were cleaned up, and they would, oftentimes cells get separated from their background, because there's only one background and there might be thousands of cells for that one background. So they would temp in a background, paint a background. Sometimes they would use, you know, a patterned background, and put the cell on top of it and put it in a mat. And then they would sell those at Disneyland. And like they had like boxes of them.
Yeah, and they probably weren't very much at all.
Like $25, $30, $50, you know, and put a couple zeros on those now.
Yeah, so if they have that provenance, especially if they have the receipt coming from Disneyland and that kind of thing, then that's going to go, okay, these are legitimate, should be at least.
Yeah.
Because what can a cell sell for now?
Oh gosh, you know, I mean, thousands of dollars, $10,000 sometimes.
Yeah, so if it's a good one, it can be a lot of money.
If it's a good one, it could be a lot of money.
Yeah, so there's a lot of reason you have to be really careful about provenance because, again, to me, as an art dealer looking in, I go, those seems like those could be knocked off fairly easily.
They can be. And then on top of that, Disney also has done Cells, where those are made for the fans, but they're made especially to sell. They're cells, and they're done with a process, and they're highly collectible. They have a value, but they're not as valuable as like a hand-painted cell.
Right, but now, they look very similar.
This, I'll tell you, there's an interesting difference between these two. So this is what I would call probably a presentation cell. We don't have the complete provenance on it. It is definitely Disney. Yeah. And it's definitely original cell, hand painted. But what they would do sometimes would be to create they would have their artists actually do these as presentation cells to give to VIPs. Yeah. So when I see something that's a very perfect picture like this, it's not an in-between. It's not like a half smile.
Right. It's a finished
too
thing.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So I think that was probably made for presentation.
Right. That makes sense.
So it's still got a value, and it's still probably just almost as valuable as a production cell.
Right.
This one is what I fondly call a Frankencell.
Okay.
Because notice it's got Alice in Wonderland in it.
Right.
But it's got a dog who was not in Alice in Wonderland. It's probably one of the dogs from Lady and the Tramp that's in the pound scene.
It is, because I recognize it.
And you know, when they sing in the pound.
Yeah.
So this was probably actually put together by that Disney department that was pasting the cells together. And then they put it on some kind of, that's not a background from Alice. It might be from
Another
Sleeping
one.
Beauty
Yeah, it
or
looks like a different completely thing.
Snow White or something, who knows. But they tempted onto that. And so I call that a Frankencell, and we explain that in the,
Yes.
because that needs to be explained, it's, and they're still collectible, but kind of as an oddity. Mm-hmm. And I just heard from somebody else on Facebook that has another one that is also Alice with a dog from Lady and the Tramp. So they might have been doing that on a day that they had a bunch of dogs from Lady and the Tramp
Right.
come in, like on their cells. And
Yeah, because Disney would do this, and they were doing it for sale, right?
they were doing it for sale.
Yeah, they go, okay, just put these
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
Whatever.
But when you're collecting cells, you need to watch out for things. Like it really helps to know the movie inside and out and know, the characters, and then you can kind of be on the watch for these.
Yeah, I'm
like
sure.
I said, they still have a value, but they're not
Yes.
as valuable.
Well, and I'm sure the people who buy and sell and deal in these, they're big into Disney. They're deep
Big.
into
Oh,
Disney.
my gosh.
They could tell you the name of that dog.
Oh yeah,
But,
I mean,
just as a child,
way
I can
more than me.
recognize that's what that's from. I recognize it. And
Yeah.
I haven't seen that movie in probably 30 years, maybe 40.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then, is there anything else in here you'd like to talk about? Or
Well, this one is interesting because this is an early concept. This is before Mary Blair. So this is from the 1930s.
oh wow,
And Disney, of course, from his earliest days, he had a fascination with Alice in Wonderland. In fact, some of his earliest moving pictures were the Alice comedies, where it was not necessarily Alice in Wonderland, but it was a little protagonist named Alice who got
Yes.
into all these adventures. And so they were, I think, from an early time, looking at doing an Alice in Wonderland feature. And so this is from the 1930s. It's by an unknown Disney artist, pencil on paper concept piece, showing the lobster quadrille and the weeping mock turtle, and very 1930s looking Alice there.
yes,
And of course, this is a sequence that didn't end up being in the feature film that came out in '51.
Right.
So they thought about it and then they dropped it.
Yes.
But I think it's an interesting piece. It's beautifully done.
yeah. Again, for me, I would be like, okay, how do we know this is from that? And because we don't know the artist,
Right.
but I mean, I look at that and I go, it looks old, looks, I can see 30s, I can see a Disney kind of thing, but how do you identify
So we know that Disney worked on this concept of the mock turtle scene.
that? Yes,
The mock turtle and the griffin, if you remember in the story, they invite Alice to tea, I
Yeah.
think, and the mock turtle cries because he's not a real turtle.
Right.
So we know that the provenance on this is that it was Disney Studios. We just don't know who the artist
Got
is.
it, yeah.
And I put that out on Facebook and asked
right.
my Disney, really deep Disney
yeah, the deep
people,
Disney.
and nobody knew.
Yeah,
So if anybody out there knows, let us know.
there you go.
Hilbert
All right.
Museum at chapman.edu.
Right here. So anything else you'd like to say on closing?
I'd just love to have more people know about the Hilbert
Yeah.
Museum, and we're really appreciative of what
Sure.
you're doing. We've been called the hidden gem of Orange County, and I
Yeah,
don't
I
want to
think
be
that-
hidden anymore.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, no, that's going to happen. It is not going to be hidden.
Yeah, and also that people see that we're part of Chapman University, and
Right.
they kind of get, oh my gosh, I have to find parking on a university campus, and that's really hard. No, we're not on the main campus.
Right.
We're off on the edge.
Right
and
next to the railroad.
We have, right next to the train station. We have our own little parking lot. We are across the street from the Free City parking structure.
Yeah, and you could literally take the train. It
the
stops
train.
right here, and you walk 400 feet,
Yep.
and you're in the museum, and you don't need parking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're right on Metrolink, so take Metrolink to the Hilbert.
Well, thank you, Mary, very
thank
much.
you.
And they can get this book that you wrote. This book,
Yes,
Nice.
I wrote it, and it's
Masterpieces
available.
of Disney Art at the
from-
Hilbert Museum.
Yeah, and so this is available at our bookstore at the front desk.
Yep, and so that's where they should order if they want one. Can they buy it online?
We don't have an online mechanism yet,
Yeah.
but they can call the museum.
So if you're into Disney, she knows about it.
Uh-huh.
Maybe she might even let you talk to her if you're in here and you're really into Disney
Could be.
for hours and hours. There you go. We'll leave it at that, Mary.
Thank you
You're
very much
so
for that.
welcome. I appreciate that. She's
right.
just waiting for you. Thank you, Mary.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you. All right.